Ammani Carter could barely keep her feet still. At just 10 years old, the world already seemed to swirl around her in bright, loud colors, and today everything felt cranked up to 11. She was sitting at Gate 34B of Sacramento International Airport, her legs swinging back and forth under the seat, making her new white sneakers flash in the airport's fluorescent glow. In her lap rested an old dog-eared book about space exploration, her favorite. Her father had given it to her when she was 5, and since then, Ammani had read it so many times the cover was almost falling off. That book was why she'd just finished the most intense science camp in the city, where she'd launched water rockets, dissected frogs, and for the first time spoken out loud in front of a whole class. That alone felt like flying. But today wasn't about camp or even space. Today was about the plane ride home, a plane ride that was different from every other she'd taken in her life. For the first time ever, Ammani was going to sit in first class. Real, actual first class. Every few minutes, she checked her bag to make sure her golden boarding pass was still there, as if it might turn into a pumpkin and vanish if she looked away too long. First class, VIP, priority boarding. She didn't even know what half those words meant, but they sounded like magic. And more than anything, they made her feel important. Not spoiled, though. Her dad, Christopher Carter, didn't spoil her without reason. He believed in hard work, the kind that made him the boss at work, the kind that made grown-ups at restaurants stand up to shake his hand when they saw him. When he gave her something special, it meant he saw the work she'd put in too. So this golden ticket wasn't just a plane seat. It was her dad's way of saying, "I see you, kid. I see how hard you're trying." The overhead speaker boomed and crackled with the boarding announcement. Ammani's heart jumped. She grabbed her backpack and hugged it tight, standing when her row was called. It felt strange and wonderful to walk past so many adults waiting in line, some of them smiling, some looking at her with puzzled expressions, as if they were wondering if she was lost. She handed her ticket to the agent at the gate, got a polite but slightly surprised nod, and walked down the jet bridge. Her heart was pounding in her ears. She was looking for 2A, her seat, the window seat, the best seat, her dad had said. She found it almost immediately, right at the front, with wide buttery leather, a soft headrest, and a small folded blanket tucked on the armrest. She pressed her hand into the cushion, smiling in disbelief. It was softer than her couch at home. She carefully placed her book in the seat pocket, gazing out the window as the world outside bustled with ramp workers, pilots, and luggage carts. It looked like a busy anthill, each person with a job, every movement important. Inside her chest, warmth bloomed. Maybe this is what success feels like, she thought. Maybe this is just the beginning. But Ammani had barely begun to enjoy it when everything changed. She was tracing her finger along the window, daydreaming about Mars when footsteps approached. She looked up and saw a flight attendant in a tight, polished uniform. The woman smiled, a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes, and leaned in like she had a secret to tell. "Hi, sweetheart," the attendant said, voice overly sweet. "Would you mind helping us out today?" Ammani blinked, confused. Helping? Did I do something wrong? She straightened in her seat, a knot of worry forming in her stomach. "We have a very special guest who needs a little extra space," the woman continued, tilting her head as if she were explaining something to a toddler. "You'd be such a helper if you'd switch seats with them. We can find you an even better spot." Ammani gripped the armrest. Questions raced through her mind, but her mouth wouldn't form any of them. She just shook her head gently. "I really want to stay here, please," she said, trying to sound as grown-up as possible. Her dad always said to use her best voice with adults. The attendant's smile flickered for a split second, but then snapped back into place. "I know you love this seat," she said with a little laugh that wasn't funny, "but we have an elderly, very important passenger. It would really help if you moved. You're such a smart young lady. I know you understand." Heat rushed into Ammani's cheeks. She wasn't trying to be difficult, but something felt wrong. She quickly looked around. Every other first-class seat was filled, with adults, all of them white, she realized. She was the only black passenger in the section, maybe on the whole plane, and nobody else was being asked to move. Ammani swallowed. "My dad bought me this seat," she whispered. "I really want to stay." For a split second, the woman's expression changed. Her jaw clenched, her eyes hardened. But then the smile returned, even tighter. "We'll be right back," she said sharply, walking to the front of the plane. Ammani sat, staring at her sneakers. She felt like she'd done something wrong, even though she hadn't. Her palms were sweating. Was it because she was young? Or was it something else? Something she didn't want to name. Before she could figure it out, the attendant returned, this time with a man in a suit. His name tag glinted under the cabin lights. His smile was even more forced. "Good afternoon, young lady," he said, voice rehearsed. "We hope you'll reconsider and switch seats. It would really help us." Ammani clutched her seatbelt. She'd already said no twice. Why were they still asking? The man crouched to her level, as if offering a prize. "You'll still get all the first-class amenities. We just need you to move. It's no big deal." From the corner of her eye, Ammani saw other passengers watching. A woman in beige whispered to her partner. A man 3 rows back frowned at her. She felt herself shrinking, becoming smaller and smaller. "My dad, he bought me this seat," she said, voice trembling. "I want to stay." The attendant leaned in, lowering her voice. "First class is for adults, most of the time. Sweetie, you're a kid. You'd be more comfortable back there with the other kids." But there were no other kids. Ammani knew. She'd seen every row. She knew what this was. They didn't want her here. They didn't think she belonged. The man's smile never moved, but his eyes chilled. "If you can't move on your own, we'll have to help you. We can't delay takeoff." Ammani froze. She hadn't done anything wrong. Her hands trembled as she reached for her phone. Her heart pounded. She scrolled to the last message from her dad. "Dad, help! They want me to give up my seat. They won't leave me alone. Please hurry." She pressed send, and for a moment, the world went silent except for the shuffle of bags and the click of seatbelts. The doors to the plane were still open. Boarding was almost done. Her throat ached. She bit the inside of her cheek. She would not cry in front of them. The man and the attendant walked away, whispering and glancing back at her. Ammani stared at her phone, praying for it to buzz, for her dad's calm voice to reach her. 2 minutes passed, then 3. Suddenly, her phone lit up. "Ammani, do not move. I'm handling it. Keep your phone close." And then, a second later, "Do they know who you are?" "They're about to." Ammani didn't quite understand, but hope flickered in her chest. She tucked the phone by her feet, arms crossed tight. She would not move, not unless her father told her to. But as she waited, the mood in the cabin shifted. The man in the suit, so confident minutes ago, stiffened as he spoke in hurried whispers with a new flight attendant. The original attendant's shiny smile was gone. News was spreading somehow. Passengers leaned in to whisper. Another flight attendant, whom Ammani hadn't seen, strode down the aisle, whispered something to the man, whose face turned pale. The captain's voice crackled over the intercom. Folks, we're going to have a brief delay for some last checks." He sounded nervous. Another message. "You're doing perfect. They're trying to figure out how deep they're in." Seconds later. "I just spoke with the COO. They know your name? And mine." When the man in the suit returned, his entire demeanor had changed. He knelt awkwardly beside her, voice nearly breaking. "Ms. Carter, there's been a misunderstanding. Of course, you may remain in your seat. We apologize for the inconvenience." Ammani stared at him. She wanted to yell. She wanted to cry. Mostly she wanted her dad. She nodded slowly, clutching her arms around herself as the man bolted to the front, where the flight crew had begun to argue in frantic whispers. Within minutes, the door of the plane opened again. One by one, the man in the suit, the original attendant, and 2 others gathered their things and left, escorted off the plane, the doors closing behind them with a heavy thud. A new crew silently took over. The plane finally began its journey to the sky, but for Ammani, nothing would ever be the same. The plane sliced through the late afternoon sunlight, heading south toward San Diego. Outside the window, clouds drifted lazily, their shapes changing every moment. Mountains, dragons, castles, and then gone. But inside Ammani Carter's chest, there was only a tight, hot ache, as if she'd swallowed something too large, and it was stuck there, refusing to budge. The world around her seemed oddly silent now. The new flight crew kept their eyes low, polite but distant, moving with extra precision as they handed out drinks and adjusted overhead bins. No one spoke to Ammani directly. In first class, the hush was thick as fog. Passengers gave her sidelong glances, some with awkward sympathy, others with curiosity, and a few with a kind of respect she hadn't expected from adults. The woman in beige from earlier even gave her a small, hesitant nod. For the first time since boarding, Ammani let herself breathe. She pressed her forehead to the cool window, watching the ground far below. A part of her wanted to disappear into the clouds, to drift so far no one could ever reach her with their questions, their demands, their expectations. But another part, smaller, fiercer, felt something else entirely. Pride. She hadn't given up her seat. She hadn't let them move her, even when her voice shook and her hands trembled. Was this what her father meant about standing your ground? About not letting the world decide where you belonged? She thought of the book in her lap, the story of Mae Jemison, the first black woman in space. Mae had stood her ground too, in rooms full of men who didn't believe she belonged, who thought she should make way for someone more important. And now here was Ammani, 10 years old, feeling like she'd just survived her own launch into a new universe. Her phone buzzed in her pocket. She fumbled for it, hands still shaking a little. Dad. Are you okay? Ammani. I'm still in my seat. They left the plane. I'm okay now. Dad. Proud of you, kiddo. We'll talk when you land. Keep your head up. She hugged the phone to her chest. The ache eased, replaced by warmth. As the plane settled into its flight path, the quiet was broken by soft conversations. Someone in row 3A, a middle-aged man with glasses and a laptop, spoke quietly to his neighbor about what he'd seen. The story began to spread, as stories do. Ammani heard fragments. Tried to move her. Only child up here. Her dad's somebody important. Even as she tried to read her book, she couldn't help but eavesdrop. Part of her burned with embarrassment, wanting to shrink away, but another part, proud, stubborn, wanted every word of the truth to be heard. Halfway through the flight, the new lead flight attendant approached. She knelt down to Ammani's level, her eyes gentle but careful. Miss Carter, she said softly, I just wanted to check if you need anything. Something to drink? A snack? We have extra cookies if you'd like. For a moment, Ammani didn't know how to respond. She shook her head but then changed her mind. Can I have apple juice, please? The attendant smiled genuinely, not forced this time. Of course, sweetheart. You let me know if you need anything at all. When the juice arrived, it came with a little packet of cookies and a folded napkin. On the napkin, written in neat block letters, was a message. You did the right thing. Never let anyone move you from your seat. It was unsigned. Ammani tucked the napkin in her book, her heart thudding. She wondered if she'd remember this moment forever. Maybe someday, when she was much older, she would show this napkin to someone and say, This is the day I learned I could hold my place in the world. The rest of the flight passed in a blur. Ammani drifted between her book, her phone, in the steady rhythm of the engine. As they descended toward San Diego, she watched the city lights appear. Tiny sparks scattered across a black ocean, each one a home, a story, a life. When the plane finally touched down and rolled to the gate, Ammani's stomach fluttered with anticipation. The new crew moved efficiently, avoiding the kind of small talk that made people uncomfortable. Ammani was the last to leave first class, letting everyone else shuffle past. As she stepped off the plane and onto the jet bridge, she spotted her father, tall, broad-shouldered, arms crossed, waiting. His eyes softened as soon as he saw her, and he opened his arms wide. Ammani broke into a run, backpack bouncing, and flung herself against his chest. He hugged her tightly, one hand on her back, the other gently stroking her braids. For a long moment, they didn't speak. The airport's noise faded into a soft background hum, as if nothing else mattered but the two of them, standing together in the middle of a moving world. When he finally pulled back, he knelt so they were eye to eye. You stood your ground, Ammani. I'm proud of you. She blinked back tears she hadn't realized were coming. I almost gave up, Dad. They wouldn't stop asking. They made me feel so small. Her father cupped her cheek, his eyes shining. They tried to make you small because they were afraid of how big you already are. People who see your light sometimes want to dim it because they don't have the courage to shine themselves. You did the bravest thing you could. You didn't move. He took her hand and they walked out of the airport together, his presence grounding her like gravity. In the car, the city rushed past in streaks of gold and blue. Ammani watched the world through the window, her father's words replaying in her mind. "Dad, why did they pick me?" she finally asked, her voice quiet. He glanced at her, lips pressed tight. "Sometimes, baby, people see what they want to see. They think you don't belong, or you're too young, or you don't fit their idea of who deserves a seat at the front. But that's their weakness, not yours. You belong anywhere you've earned a place. Remember that." They drove in silence for a while, letting the answers settle. As the cityscape gave way to quieter neighborhoods, Ammani's phone pinged again. She glanced down. A news notification, followed by several messages from friends at camp. News headline: Child refuses to give up first-class seat, airline staff removed after incident. Her eyes widened. "Dad, it's on the news!" He smiled gently. "I thought it might be. Word spreads fast when people do the right thing, especially when they're not expected to." Messages poured in. Nyla: "Was that you?" Ricky: "You're on Twitter." Ava: "You're a legend." Ammani felt a strange swirl of pride and anxiety. She hadn't meant to make a scene. She'd only wanted to keep her place, to prove to herself and maybe to her dad that she could do it. When they finally reached home, her father wrapped an arm around her shoulders. "It's not about the seat, you know," he said quietly. "It's about knowing your worth and holding on to it, even when others try to take it away." She nodded, too overwhelmed to say anything else. In the safe warmth of her own room, Ammani crawled under the covers, clutching her book, her phone, and the folded napkin. Tomorrow she'd be on the front page, but tonight she was just a girl, tired and brave, learning how to stand her ground. Sunlight spilled across Ammani's bedroom, waking her much earlier than usual. She blinked against the brightness, disoriented, a fragment of dream still clinging to her. The sensation of flying, of clouds parting, and golden light flooding her path. For a moment, she wondered if it had all been a dream. The seat, the voices, the trembling in her hands, the strange hush after the crew left the plane. But her phone buzzed on the nightstand, and the notification snapped her back to reality. News had traveled fast, faster than she'd ever imagined. Her name, her story, her father's name were already being shared in group chats, on social media, even on national news. There were headlines and hashtags. "Tree stand your ground, Rastia's first-class justice. Chakun, not giving up my seat." Her inbox was flooded with messages, friends, cousins, people she barely knew from science camp, strangers from other states. Some wrote, "You're so brave." Others confessed they'd been in similar situations and stayed silent. Some even wrote to say they'd cried reading about her. There were stories of girls who'd given up their seats, of boys who'd stayed quiet when they felt small. Ammani read them all, heart pounding. She was only 10 years old. Was she really ready for this? Downstairs, her father was making breakfast, the familiar clatter and sizzle grounding her in the ordinary. He looked up as she entered, phone in one hand, braids a little wild. His eyes softened. "Sleep okay, superstar?" he teased gently. Ammani managed a small smile. "Everyone's talking about it." He nodded, flipping pancakes with practiced ease. "That's what happens when you stand up for yourself, Ammani. Sometimes the world notices." "But Dad, I didn't want to be famous. I just wanted to keep my seat. I just wanted them to treat me like I belonged there." He knelt beside her, taking both her hands in his. "I know. That's why your voice mattered. Because you weren't trying to make a scene. You just asked for what was right." There was a knock at the door. Her father frowned, wiping his hands on a towel. Outside stood a woman from the local newspaper, holding a notebook, and a cameraman from a TV station. Ammani shrank behind her dad, but he stood tall, shielding her. "She'll talk if she wants to, but no pushing." The woman smiled kindly. "No pressure, but a lot of people want to hear from you, Ammani. Not just for what happened on the plane, but for what it means." A swirl of nerves and pride warred in Ammani's stomach. She looked up at her dad, who nodded gently. She stepped onto the porch, clutching her old space book for comfort. The reporter knelt down to her level. "Why didn't you just give up your seat?" Ammani thought about all the answers she could give. She thought of her father's words, the napkin message from the flight attendant, the feeling in her heart when she held her ground. She answered simply, voice barely more than a whisper, because my dad worked hard for it, and I worked hard for it. I shouldn't have to move just because someone else wanted my place. The reporter smiled, jotting notes. What would you tell other kids who feel like they don't belong? Ammani took a breath, remembering how small she'd felt, the burning in her cheeks, the pressure to make herself invisible. You belong anywhere you've earned your place. Even if you're scared, even if your hands shake, you can say no. It's okay to stay where you're supposed to be. By noon, the interview was all over local TV. By afternoon, national outlets had picked it up. There were think pieces, angry commentaries, outpourings of support, but also some criticism. Some people insisted Ammani was too young for first class. Others said she was playing the race card. Others accused her father of using his influence. But the response that stuck with Ammani most came in the form of letters. Hundreds, then thousands of handwritten notes, drawings from other children, and stories from adults who'd been silent too long. Teachers invited her to Zoom with classrooms. Activists reached out, praising her for being a symbol of dignity and courage. She even received a letter from Mae Jemison herself. Dear Ammani, sometimes the smallest voices echo the farthest. Thank you for reminding all of us what it means to hold your ground. No matter how high the altitude or how strong the headwinds, the stars are waiting for you. Mae Jemison. Ammani held that letter for hours, tracing the signature over and over. She didn't want to be a hero. She just wanted to do her work, read her books, and maybe one day touch the sky. But her story had grown beyond her. In boardrooms, airline executives debated new policies about seating and staff conduct. Pilots' union leaders demanded more training and accountability. Civil rights organizations wrote open letters to the airline. The 3 crew members who had harassed her were fired within 48 hours, publicly, with apologies from the company president. The airline even offered to fly her and her father anywhere in the world, first class as a symbolic gesture. Ammani quietly refused. I just want people to know kids deserve respect too. You don't have to give up your seat for someone bigger, older, or louder. A week later, her school principal called a special assembly. The auditorium buzzed with energy as students shuffled to their seats. Teachers, staff, and even the mayor filled the back rows. Ammani sat in the front, hands sweating as her name was called. She stood on the stage, knees knocking, microphone heavy in her hands. She scanned the crowd and found her dad at the back, nodding encouragement. Her voice shook, but her message was clear. People will try to move you out of the way if you're small or quiet or different. Sometimes they won't listen the first time you say no, or the second time, or even the third. But if you know you're right, if you earned your place, you don't have to move. Even when you're scared, even when you feel alone, you're not. There are people behind you who need you to stand your ground, so they can too. If you ever feel like you don't belong, remember, maybe you're there to show others they can belong too. The applause thundered. Some students stood, clapping and cheering. Teachers dabbed their eyes. And for the first time since that day on the plane, Ammani felt completely, utterly seen. That evening, as the sun set in streaks of gold and purple, Ammani and her father sat in the backyard, watching stars blink awake. The air was soft and warm. Her father squeezed her hand. You changed more than just one flight, Ammani. You changed what people think is possible. She rested her head on his shoulder, feeling the solid, steady beat of his heart. I just wanted to read my book, Dad. He laughed quietly. Sometimes changing the world starts with not letting anyone take your seat. They watched the stars, silent and infinite, and for the first time, Ammani felt the universe opening, not as something she needed to fight for, but as a place that could finally, truly belong to her, too.